Today, we walk through how simple graphs and trade-offs show international trade as a win-win process, not a zero-sum battle. We will use the wine and cheese example to visualize how specialization pushes total output higher, then show how exchange lets both sides consume more. By the end, you will see how these ideas guide real business decisions, policy debates, and even your own thinking about costs, benefits, and strategic focus. Adam Smith's starting insight is simple. When people or countries specialize, productivity rises. Think about the paper airplane assembly line. Splitting 5 folds across 5 workers lets each person master a single motion, and the group creates more planes in the same time. The same logic applies when a country focuses on wine or cheese, instead of trying to do everything equally. This boost in total output is the raw material that later turns into gains from trade, because there is now more to exchange. Consider the 2-person household. One prefers cooking, the other prefers doing laundry. If each insists on doing both tasks, they spend extra time and energy on work they dislike and perform slowly. When they agree that one cooks for both and the other handles laundry for both, each person leans into their strength, and both end up better off with clean clothes and a cooked meal. International trade is the same pattern at a larger scale. Each country specializes where it is relatively strong, then trades to cover what it does not produce efficiently. In the wine and cheese example, each country has a production possibilities line that shows every combination it can produce with its finite resources. Country A can move along its line between 100 pounds of cheese and 50 bottles of wine. Country B can move between 150 pounds of cheese and 30 bottles of wine. Without trade, each country must both produce and consume at some point on its own line, like A choosing 25 wine and 50 cheese, or B choosing 15 wine and 75 cheese. Graphically, autarky means your consumption point can never leave your production frontier, which limits what households and firms inside that country can enjoy. When country A shifts from cheese to wine, it gives up 2 pounds of cheese for each extra bottle of wine, so its opportunity cost of wine is 2 pounds of cheese. Country B must give up 3 pounds of cheese for each bottle of wine, so its cost of producing wine is higher in terms of foregone cheese. This means A has a comparative advantage in wine, while B has a comparative advantage in cheese, even though both can technically produce both products. If they trade at a rate between 2 and 3 pounds of cheese per bottle, for example 2.5, both gain because A gets more cheese per bottle than it could make domestically, and B gets wine for fewer pounds of cheese than it would sacrifice by making wine itself. When A specializes toward wine and B specializes toward cheese, world production rises to 50 bottles of wine and 150 pounds of cheese. At the earlier autarky points, the combined output was lower, which visually sits inside the new global production possibility box. With trade at 2.5 pounds per bottle, A can give up some wine to gain more cheese than it could have produced on its own, while B can give up some cheese to gain more wine than it could have produced with the same sacrifice. On the graphs, both countries now consume at points that lie outside their original production lines, making the gain from trade literally visible as extra space for consumption. Suppose country A's technology improves so much that it can now produce both wine and cheese more efficiently than B in absolute terms. Even then, its internal trade-off remains 1 bottle of wine for 2 pounds of cheese, while B still sacrifices 3 pounds of cheese for a bottle of wine. Because A can still get more than 2 pounds of cheese for a bottle through trade, and B can still avoid giving up 3 pounds of cheese to make wine, comparative advantage survives. In business terms, being better at everything does not mean you should do everything. You still gain by focusing where your relative cost edge is greatest. The simple 2-country, 2-good model scales to the global economy by adding more countries and more tradable goods. The core principle holds. Each country tends to specialize in goods that use its relatively abundant factors, such as land, labor, or capital, at lowest cost. For example, a labor-abundant country tends toward labor-intensive exports, while a capital-abundant country leans toward capital-intensive products. Over time, broader factors like industry-specific skills, technology, and competencies become part of the strategic playbook, and policy choices shape how those advantages develop or erode. While the graphs show clear global gains, in practice the winners and losers are not evenly visible. consumers benefit quietly from cheaper imports, while specific groups, like cheese producers in A or wine producers in B, feel the pain of adjustment intensely. If labor and capital cannot move smoothly from shrinking sectors to expanding ones, and wages or prices remain sticky, total output can fall below the model's potential in the short run. Arguments around infant industries and national security often reflect these tensions, but the model warns that long-lasting protection and misjudged industries can lock in inefficiencies instead of building real comparative advantage. The theory of international trade tells you to look at relative costs, not just raw capability, when deciding what to produce and what to source from others. Graphing production possibilities and trade-offs forces clarity about which combinations are truly feasible and where specialization can lift total output. At the same time, sustainable trade strategies must anticipate which workers, sectors, or regions will bear adjustment costs and design paths for them to move toward higher productivity roles. Your next step is to apply these graphs and trade-off matrices to your own context, using them as tools for clearer production, sourcing, and policy choices in a globally connected economy.